Hey everyone, David here, and I've got some exciting news to share. I've decided to write a book, and I've entitled it Psychosocial Hazards Are Real. The book is intended to help clarify the fact that psychological safety cannot be achieved without paying attention to the psychosocial hazards people are being exposed to. Despite how much individuals might be interested in treating others with kindness, dignity, and respect, many cultures are so full of psychosocial traps that no psychological health and safety effort can ultimately succeed. But to address psychosocial hazards, you first have to know what they are, and you have to have some idea what to do to address them. Though the book won't be 100% complete until the spring of 2025, I'd like to share a unique opportunity to reserve a copy during the book presale campaign. The campaign will run from September 16th to October 18th, 2024. This will be an opportunity to get one of the first copies of the book, tickets to the book launch event, and other opportunities to learn more about psychosocial hazards. For more information, you can go to my personal LinkedIn or Facebook page, or the LinkedIn, Facebook, or webpage for ID2 Solutions. Don't miss out on this unique opportunity. Now, back to this episode of the podcast. Maintaining one's mental health is extremely difficult when dealing with chronic disease or constant pain. Navigating the healthcare system can exacerbate the physical and psychological impacts of one's health condition. We'll talk about navigating chronic disease in an interdisciplinary way up next on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each week, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk psychological health and safety. Well, welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. Physical pain is your body's way of letting you know that something's wrong. It leads you to address ailments or seek treatment for injuries. However, there's also a psychological aspect to pain. People who experience chronic pain are much more likely to develop mood and anxiety disorders. Persistent chronic pain can make you feel depressed and hopeless, leave you feeling anxious, and have you ruminating over your condition, or can result in addiction to pain medication. These feelings can then exacerbate the pain you're already experiencing. Depression can cause and worsen pain. While stress creates inflammation and muscle tension, it increases pain as well. So it's possible to get caught in a cycle of emotional distress and physical pain with each element magnifying the other. So that's the conversation today. This situation that some find themselves in. I would dare to say that all human beings have experienced some pain of some kind at some point in their life. But what happens when it becomes chronic? What's life like? How do you navigate through that? Well, I have someone who's got a bit of background and some understanding of this topic. So I'm going to dive into it as I often do with an introduction of my guest by my guest, in this case with this question: who is Dr. Jacob Kendall?
Yeah, thanks, David. Glad to be here. I know we're going to have a good conversation. Yeah, so my PhD, you introduced me as Dr. Jacob Kendall. I'm fine with Jacob for sure, but my PhD is in interdisciplinary aging studies. That's way too many syllables, so I just say gerontology. Um, And I have a truly interdisciplinary background. I much prefer to be broadly focused than deeply focused, jack of all trades kind of thing. So I have a background in social work, public health, and theology, and I really like to connect the dots between those things. And so I approach health, chronic disease, et cetera. Those topics, aging, from a very multi-dimensional approach. It's great to have experts. I've had two open heart surgeries. I'll get back to that in a moment. And of course, I'm really glad that my surgeons were so good at this specific kind of surgery. We need the experts, but I think moving forward, we also need to have some people who are truly interdisciplinary, multidimensional thinkers. So I'm a big advocate of that. And then on the personal side, like I mentioned, I have had two open heart surgeries, and that is profoundly impactful in all that I do professionally. And so I do a chronic disease advocacy, more specifically heart disease advocacy. A third of the world dies from heart disease, so there are a lot of people with heart disease, and I think that when it comes to our healthcare system here in the U.S., we need to be doing a lot better.
Yes, yes, yes. I absolutely agree with you. Absolutely agree with you. One other somewhat standard question I ask folks when they come on is, what does psychological health and safety mean to you when you hear that?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that when I hear that term come to mind. One, having a social work degree. I've never been a therapist, but I still have those that training, and I have been a co-founder of a small mental health practice. I'm not a provider myself, but obviously having worked with a lot of social workers, being in that arena, and as a professor, I taught a course on mental health. So mental health is something that's really, really, really important in this country. We're still lugging around very heavy brains that we were carrying through the hunter gatherer times, but we live in a post industrial world. And it's no wonder that stress and anxiety have increased. And if we don't do something about that, it's going to get out of hand if it hasn't already. Um, you mentioned people with chronic pain have higher risk of anxiety and stress and things like that. And I do have chronic pain. I also have back issues. I can attest to that. There's also a higher risk of mental health issues when it comes to things like heart disease and having had surgeries. And I'm on two meds now for anti-anxiety because it's a physiological issue, something that they found microbleeds in my brain that is a direct cause of that. And that traces back to my second heart surgery. So all these things are connected. That's kind of the next point. One thing that I would talk about in my when I was a professor and I taught a course on mental health around the world, I talked about the Rene Descartes, the Cartesian mind body duality, and I'm like, it's not these separate categories. It's more like a smooth continuum, right? Depression is as much of a physiological and bodily condition as it is heart disease, as is whatever, right? And I think that if we're truly going to address things correctly, that is one of the approaches that we need to be taking. I'm sure that I'll have the opportunity to get to something specific about my own experiences when it comes to psychological health and safety, but I'll just go ahead and give the teaser of I work from home, most of my work is remote, and my back pain, basically is a causal factor in uh, it, any organization that has a requirement to always have your Zoom camera on does not always work well with me. So
So,
yeah,
so well, say more about that. That little teaser. I can't say more about how what that connection for you.
yeah, absolutely. So I have, I'm members of committees or whatnot, and some of these organizations have a always camera on policy, and I've always pushed back on that because of my back pain. It's difficult. I'm standing right now, so I either have to stand, sometimes sit, sometimes lie down. If I'm lying down, it's very disruptive. Like, it looks weird if I'm lying down and I'm on the camera, but I'm lying down because that's the only comfortable position I can be, and so I want to have my camera off. And um, some people have been like, okay, do the best you can. Others was like, deal with it, turn your camera on, and that's not a good response. um, and I usually can go through like an accommodations office as long as I get a doctor's note and say, hey, Jacob he can't sit up all the time, so he needs to be able to adjust to this policy. And I understand that we're in a place where it's hard to judge that. without having a doctor's note. But I do want to point out here that why does disability and chronic pain have to be so medicalized?
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Why does it have to go through medicine to get approval? That I don't know a way around it, but I at least think that we should be asking that question, because to say that I have to have a physician's note to be comfortable, that means that you're medicalizing what I have.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, I am with you 100% on that. I believe that all social settings, but particularly work settings, should be adjusted and adjusted to the people we've invited to participate in whatever the world that is. You hired that person, you recruited that person for the committee, you asked them to join in whatever the world you were doing. So why is it that the focus isn't on making that involvement as safe and as comfortable as possible for that person, as opposed to we do it this way. You get to adjust everything in your life to what it is that I'm doing today, which just might not be safe or healthy for you. Doesn't mean there's something wrong with either state. Doesn't mean I'm right or wrong, you're right or wrong, but they're very different. Your life experience, your health experience, your everything is just different from mine. And that gets me really fired up when I hear about these organizations who yeah, we want your skill, we want your contribution, but we want it our way. And I think, folks are starting to push back and go like, well, hold up. Maybe if you want my contribution, you got to take it from me the way I give it to you. Otherwise, get it from somebody else.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I've been both a in the professional arena, I've been both someone who is a an administrator and a an employer, a lower end person. On the teaching side of things, I've been both a professor and a student in online formats. And so I'll speak from the perspective of being a student, but having been a professor and being raised in academia, that's just the language that I know. And so as a student, that's when I was actually told, well, it's a cameras on policy and you just need to deal with it. And one of the main arguments in both teaching and working situations with having cameras on is that they can't tell you if you're there or if you're being participatory or if you're engaging properly or whatever unless you have your camera on. And I'm thinking I've been a professor because of COVID. I taught my last year and a half as being a professor online, and I never required cameras to be on, and I had to come up with other ways to ensure that they were being engaged. And my thinking is, if your problem is that you can't tell whether I'm engaged or not with my camera off, then you need to teach that class better.
That's exactly right. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, it is again, the problem is not the student, it's not the worker, that's not the problem. The problem is the system that we tried to shove this person into and have them adjust to the system. These systems that are supposedly for the benefit of humanity as a species should be adjusted to the humans. Just adjust them to the humans. And all of these humans are different, have different learning styles, different performance styles, different. They can produce very similar things. We can all produce very similar outcomes. We just do it differently. And frankly, I think we have limited our ability again as a species to be innovative because we've said it's got to be this way. Well, I saw it's a I'm off on a tangent here, but I watched a documentary a while back that showed a company in Japan that has robots that work in retail settings that allow people who are profoundly disabled, who would otherwise not be able to leave their home to do anything, to be able to interact with other people through cameras and such. So giving these folks opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have, and on the other hand, actually creating a pretty cool experience for the worker as well, for the customer as well. So I think people are just too limited in their thinking. There's not wrong with people. There's just differences in people, at least in
Yeah,
my
absolutely. It is a systems issue. As a social worker, I have a couple of things to in response to what you just said. First of all, as a social worker, and I did teach this. I first taught social work, and then I taught global health. And so, the one of the most well known or common examples is a person who is in a wheelchair cannot access City Hall because they're disabled. That is a false statement, right? It's not a person who's disabled. The correct statement is a person in a wheelchair cannot access City Hall because City Hall has not provided them with a means of doing so. It is a systems issue. So that's one thing I'll say. The second thing, I'm glad that you mentioned Japan. First of all, I've been to Japan, a very impressive society in many, many ways. Um, and not perfect, they have things that are challenging, but in that particular regard, it's impressive. I went, I walked all over Tokyo, and everywhere I saw, they had it's a certain kind of bumpy panel. I don't know how to describe it. All along the sidewalks, it's for people who are blind. Like, why do we not have that? And so that's my question here. Is here in the U.S., and I'll speak for my country because that's what I know best. I'm getting the feeling that we're somewhat unique in this regard, but we just adamantly refuse to learn from good examples in other countries. We just assume that our way of doing things is better. But you know what? People in those other countries are laughing at us.
Yes. 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 No, oh boy. Oh boy. I'm getting a little excited here. So let me get back to a couple of the questions I want to make sure that I ask you. So can you chat a little bit about some of the healthcare challenges that uh, have informed your life, some of your lived experience in that regard?
Yeah. Well, obviously, having had two surgeries like that, no kind of experience like that exists in a vacuum. I had a congenital issue, and so I've been seeing cardiologists and various other providers since I was age. They call that at age 3. And the older you get, the more stuff you have to deal with. And so I have all kinds of specialists as providers, and some of them are wonderful. Some of them are curious rather than judgmental. Some of them will back you up, will fight for you, and then they're in your corner. But of course, that's not happening with all of them. I'll tell you one kind of an example. This has to do with empathy. This is the kind of thing where I wish that I could just go talk to a whole bunch of doctors and say, "Hey, listen, do better," and give them examples. Here's an example. I'm 38 and I've already had two surgeries. That is not within the norm, not even close. A very common thing that I hear when I walk into a room is, or I'm waiting in the room, the doctor or the nurse comes in and they see my medical records and they'll say something like, "Wow, you're really young to have had two surgeries." And what I want to say is, did you think that you were telling me something that I don't already know? Like, maybe consider that I've spent many years dealing with the fact that I've had to have these at much younger ages, and there's a lot of vulnerability there. And the first thing that you say is, "Wow, you're really young to have had two surgeries." Like, did it ever go through your mind that that's not the most empathic thing to say? And listen, I totally acknowledge that I'm an interesting case, and I'm totally fine with people being curious about it. It's not what they say, it's how they say it, right? And this has an effect on patients when they hear these kinds of messages. I'm a gerontologist, and many physicians unfortunately treat older adults as the problems that they're going through, like, "Oh, I have a bad knee," or, "Oh, I'm experiencing pain," or, "Oh, I'm forgetting things," or, "Oh, I have heart failure," and all these other things. Well, you're just getting older. That's normal. Why can't we take one step beyond that? Why does it have to be the norm, right? Um, so I could go on with all kinds of examples, but all of those interactions, all of those little things, it reminds me of microaggressions. I'm not gonna go so far as to say that's what it is, but I think it's the same concept. It's these little bitty pinpricks, and over time, that ends up having a major impact on your mental health, your emotional state, all of that.
Does. It absolutely does. So what you're describing, I can connect what you're describing to the work that I do and the research I've done. So my definition of a psychosocial hazard is a psychosocial factor that's perceived or experienced by the person exposed as a threat that changes their behavior in some way. And what you described is a psychosocial hazard. Your assumption and statement that I am somehow, unique, that feels after a while, after I get enough, that starts to feel, it doesn't feel good to me. It causes me to adjust the way I state things and adjust who I work with and the places that I go when I shouldn't have to have that kind of limitation based on who I am. And again, this is supposed to be a health care organization. You're supposedly in existence to care for people's health. But and again, I don't say this, I don't think a lot of people do it intentionally. I believe it is the culture of the organizations themselves, which is about they are a number, they're a patient, and frankly, we're looking at the bottom line anyway. What kind of insurance do they have? You can't even get to the doctor until I sit in pain talking to someone about insurance. Now, how much money I have, I am in pain. And this comes from a person who's never been hasn't been hospitalized since I was 5, but I was in the fire rescue service and I took a lot of people to the hospital. A lot of people. And I had to watch how they were treated when I go, hold up. We just picked this person. We cut them out of a car, dug them out, and carried them out of a building on fire. We bring them to you, expecting you to help them, and the first thing is, well, where's their insurance card? And, we're, this and that. And they're there to receive help. And then those of us that are watching that, there's a kind of vicarious trauma that says, like, hold up, that's the system. Do I even want to bring people back to this hospital? Do I make, and frankly, I can tell you for certain that there are firefighters, EMTs, people. I did it. There are places we wouldn't take you to particular hospitals if you weren't going to treat people in a particular way. We wouldn't. We divert, go someplace else. Go, no use in going over there. They're simply going to do X, Y, or Z. So again, it certainly connects to exactly what you were talking about. Why is it that we just can't treat people primarily like human beings and address what's been presented to us without all the editorializing?
Yeah. No, I mean, I have conversations like this, and correctly enough, you know, someone will inevitably at some point, just like you have done, bring up the fact that this is a systems level issue, and it goes, insurance companies are way up here, and then providers, and then patients. I mean, providers are more victims of the insurance company than they are perpetrators of it, and they'll tell you that. They'll commiserate alongside you. There are many days when I realize that if we zoom out long enough, or wide enough, right, and we realize, oh, this is something that comes down from the top. When you do that and you get to a certain point up here, you really, I think we have to acknowledge that this is in many ways an intractable problem. It is intractable. Um, and I get asked on a regular basis, well, what is your suggestion? Because this is a huge beast that you're trying to take on. And I would love to do that, but I have to bring it back down to a local level. And so a lot of what I do is really just focus on patients and caregivers who are in the midst of a crisis, and they don't have time to intellectualize all of this stuff, right? They're in the midst of a crisis right here. Is that the preferred way that I want to address these problems? No, I would rather go to the top and tear the system down, quite frankly, but that's not going to work. And I got to find my proper place in that spectrum where I can actually do some good. But I mean, you're hitting on some key points here. It's a part of the system, and I'm not totally convinced that tackling the root cause is where we should put our energy right now, because you basically have to convince the people at the very top to start liking money less than they do.
Wow. Yeah. What a issue that is.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow Flourish DX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the Flourish DX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
So what does it mean to be an interdisciplinarian? I can't say I when I think about the word, I go like, I think I know what that means, but I can't say I've ever talked to anyone who's kind of into that.
I know. I fully I fully admit I've had these conversations with people who have been in and outside of academia, and they'll tell me, Jacob, I'm telling you, the term interdisciplinary is not going to travel outside of academia. And that is true. I'm trying to come up with a good term. Multidimensional is the best one I've come up with, but I need some kind of term to convey the following. Like I said earlier, I prefer to be an expert of none, jack of all trades. I really like connecting the dots, building bridges across the gaps that exist between different industries, between different subject matter areas, between different disciplines at a university. I think that's a great example. Why do you go to university? It has to be the psychology department, the history department, the biology department. That's a long-standing tradition. It'll probably never end, unfortunately. I'm just using it as an example. There are these silos that exist. It exists in medicine as well. My neurologist and my heart doctor and my physical therapist and my dentist, I got to sign medical releases form for all of them. Like, and sometimes they're willing to reach out and talk to the other provider, but they have to choose to do that. That's their own choice to take the extra amount of time to call this other provider, because my neurologist and my cardiologist, like, the care from those two, it mesh with one another, but they have to make the choice to communicate with one another. That should be something that's not merely a choice. It should be a natural part of the system. But anyway, as an interdisciplinarian, that's how I see it: is let's build these bridges across these gaps, because it's stupid that the gaps exist in the first place. It's dumb. So that's how I would explain it. And I have, from an academic perspective, interdisciplinary means that I have formal training in several different areas. Um, my PhD alone is interdisciplinary aging studies, like I said. And so we learned about aging from the perspective of cell biology, genetics, cognitive neuroscience, psychology, demography, epidemiology, law, ethics, architecture, engineering. Very, very broad based. That's how I prefer it. Again, we definitely need people who go super deep with something really specific. That's awesome. But moving forward, we got to have these people who are up here looking at the whole forest and not just the trees within them. Does that make sense?
It does. And actually, as you're describing that, I start to find some kinship with that view. That's the way I look at safety as well. So again, having spent, I kind of backed into it because I started on the lagging indicator side of safety conversations, showing up at people's houses on fires, showing up when people are, have been shot or stabbed or they wrecked their car already, and then we're expected to do something about it. Sometimes we could, but a lot of times we couldn't. And then I spent a little bit of time as a fire inspector on the prevention side, but prevention was all about preventing fires. And I started to come to this conclusion that we should have a prevention strategy for everything we respond to, not just the fires. So then spent a little bit of time doing some emergency management, because all these big most of these big disasters, how we respond to them is the same way we respond to the small stuff. It's chaotic. We don't really know who's in charge of what, and then we wonder why it goes sideways. And I did my doctoral research in occupational health and safety was around psychosocial hazard mitigation. And how do we have all these systems out there set up with, we do a lot of safety related things that don't cause people to feel safe at all because it's in a silo. Let's talk about chemical hazards and or talk about biological in this silo, when what's going on is my body has these really interesting kinds of things that go on when I get exposed to something that's unsafe. My amygdala fires up and says that's not safe, and it happens in milliseconds. And then if it's really bad, it freezes the rest of the body and says, no, until you get that handled, you can't do anything else. So I can't have a long-standing conversation. I can't have these really high-minded discussions because I don't feel safe. I don't. And now this conversation about psychological safety is, oh, we need to have these environments where people can come and be their whole selves. And well, that's wonderful, but there are psychosocial hazards. This is how this connects. There are aspects of these systems that were built. They were built for one reason and one reason only: to make money. That is the priority. So everything defaults to that. Everything has to work around that, as opposed to systems that were built to care for human beings. And profit is a lovely logical byproduct, but if we take care of the human part of it, the money stuff will work itself out. I believe it will. I honestly, you'll have more customers, you'll have more, more people will come to your healthcare organization when they feel like their health is actually being cared for. and they're not being treated like a commodity.
I fully believe that having integrity and making a profit can go hand in hand. They just don't most of the time. So I think what comes to mind for me, having a social work background, in your discussion about responding to crisis situations, um, the following was seemed to already be happening before George Floyd and other shootings like that. But I think I haven't seen the numbers, but I think that it's ramped up since then. And this is people like social workers and other uh, professionals like that, and what involvement can they have with police departments, or do they even accompany a police officer to that kind of situation? Because police officers, one, don't have that kind of psychosocial training, and two, we shouldn't expect them to.
They can't
That's
be all
not that.
things, all people.
Exactly, exactly. And so that's an example that I think of where I think that if we sat down at a table and genuinely cared enough to do it, we could put together a system in which we're thinking across these divides. And there are bad examples of this not being done well. I've heard that the police department, the police work in Atlanta I hear that that's a really bad way of doing it. But I think Washington State has some good examples where you have these responders going along with them. So there's enough there. I think there's enough there to show us, listen, we need to look more into this, because the way that things are handled right now is not like, it's not the best. We need to do better.
Yes, yes, yeah. Well, interesting you mentioned those two examples. I currently live in Atlanta. I'm originally from Seattle, so I get both. They're- and again, I I see all of these as data points that are not inherently in and of themselves. If you were to ask the people, meet the people, I don't believe that most of the human beings are doing this to be negative, to be bad. At the time, they believe that's the thing they're supposed to do. And often it's because they're in a silo. They've only thought about this aspect. They don't consider other things they don't know anything about. But then there's not a system to bring those other voices together. Government, at least, so there are special purpose governments and general purpose governments. And I spent the vast majority of my life in general purpose governments. Governments are supposed to do everything. I don't expect they're going to be good at all of it, which is then the benefit of having folks in private sector to assist. But sadly, what's happened is people have said, well, we should run government like a business. No, we should not, because business is primarily about making money. And I can't say I'm necessarily against that, but most of the major challenges that we've had as a society, as human beings, are solved by us coming together and generally under a governmental structure. And that's how we solve really big things, because a lot of the boundaries have to get dropped because it has to be done, and it can't be done in a silo. So I yes, that's just kind of the way it is. It's kind of the way it
Yeah,
is.
and I think a parallel, probably maybe even a cause of siloing things, is that this is somewhat of a theory of mine, but we dichotomize everything. It's either this or that. I mean, look at our ideological polarization, which is ramped up during an election year right now. You're either this or you're that, and there's no sense of, well, I'm a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And so where this comes down to government is anything anything that people interpret as even the slightest hint of a whisper of what they think socialism means, then they're completely turned off to it. And I think that we're shut down. These conversations just shut down because of that. And so if I sit here and I say I think this is where the all the responses to the idea of defund the police came from. It's, everyone interprets it as an all or nothing approach. I'm not like it's very common for me to talk about these issues, and then people are like, "Oh, well, you just hate capitalism." I'm like, no, I think capitalism has a place. It can be a really useful tool. What I'm saying, though, is that we need to talking about these other ways of doing things as well, so that we can get the best out of everything. But it's like if you say one bad thing about capitalism, people just think, "Oh, well, you just want to, be totally on the left side of things." Like, no, things in moderation, and everyone has something to, like, every perspective matters. I just want everyone to be sitting around the table and not talking about these extremes, but we don't live in that society right now.
Yes, we don't. We don't live in that society, but I am finding myself being introduced, connected, and communicating with more people who happen to think that way though. So again, we have an inconsistency between the human beings that are operating and the systems that they're operating in. And I don't know what it is that's causing us to become more wise. It might be technology. It might be, I don't know what it is. It might be historic. I don't know, but I see more people. Again, I said a while back, the more birthdays I have, the less interested I am in binary choices about anything. The word's not a binary. It's not just this or that. It's this and that, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And that's what it is today. Tomorrow, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in achieving whatever goal it is I'm trying to achieve at the time, whatever that is with whoever I'm trying to achieve it with. That's all. And look, and that means that I can, I can feel this way about this thing today, and tomorrow I could get more data, more information, get more knowledge about whatever, and feel a little differently. And that's okay. That doesn't make me and frankly, there's nothing wrong with that. I absolutely reject these labels that get put on. That's right. This is wrong. The question is whether or not it helps us, you and me, achieve whatever it is you and me, are trying to achieve at the time. Not, I have a way, so David's way is the right way, and you have to conform to it. I won't do that because guess what? You can't make me. You can't make me. If I don't want to, if I'm willing to accept the consequences of not, I won't. And why is it that we just can't work together on that? Because there's some things that you know and are better at than I am.
I think there's this conflation of, it seems like so many of us conflate learning from someone else's perspective and agreeing with their perspective, but they're not the same thing. Like, why is my whole being harmed if I sit down at the table and talk with someone who has a completely different worldview from us? It doesn't have to be that way. And I know we're getting off topic from the original thing, but I will say, I fully believe, and you could see this with the past few presidential elections in particular, because that was at the national level. I fully believe that the issues that exist at the very top, so national level issues, we won't even get global here. National level issues have trickle down effects that affect the stress and anxiety and mental and physical health of individual people. There's an effect of that.
There is. There absolutely is. Absolutely is. One other term that you used in some of your writings and the way you speak and is this concept of four-dimensional thinking. So tell me a little bit about that. That's just very fascinating.
Yeah, I put it in there so people will ask. I'm getting better at it. Well, not that people ask that. I just want it to be eye catching or whatever. I'm getting better at explaining in a short period of time. It goes back to what I said earlier about multidimensional thinking. So I'm going to frame this in terms of health because that's what I talk about when I go do speaking engagements and whatnot. I think you can fill in the blank with instead of health, whatever. But health is more than individualistic. It's more than specific. In this case, it's more than medical. It's more than here or local, and it's more than now. But with American individualism, like, I think it's run amok, right? We are obsessed with individual liberty to the point that we have neglected to see that all these other levels exist as well. A really common example is, well, I don't want to support policy for obesity because those people just choose to eat too much. That's not accurate. Obesity is a systemic level issue. Many people who are obese live in poorer areas. We might refer to them as food deserts, where the only food they have access to are high in sodium, like at convenience stores, high in carbs, etc., high in sugars. And there's no individual level decision that they can make that will give them access to healthier foods. Right. And it's the same with stroke. It's the same with diabetes. It's the same with heart attack. All these things they're all related to one another. It's not just an individual level decision. But if we think that it is, then we're going to not choose policies that would be better in supporting these problems. We have to move beyond the level of the individual to understand these things, right? And so people ask me, well, people who are in the midst of a crisis, like a caregiving crisis or whatever, they don't care about zooming out and looking at these things. But even if we just zoom out a little bit, so here's a question that I have for many providers: why are you not encouraging your patients to bring along their family member or their caregiver with them to the next appointment? Because that person is just as much involved in their healthcare as the patient themselves and as you are. Just zoom out just a little bit, and see that health is not just an individual. It is a family level issue. It is a community level issue. Health is also more than medical, right? We see it as medical because it's so medicalized, and that's where we are with things. But it's more than medical. I cannot rely only on the medical advice of my doctors and be the healthiest that I can possibly be. It's not going to happen, and I don't expect my physicians to be other than my medical specialists. What I do expect is that people need a willingness to hear from other and learn from other perspectives. It's more than here. Things get really interesting when you start comparing healthcare access in different cities, different counties, different states. And you mentioned Japan earlier. Like, why are we not doing a better job at learning from these successful examples in other places? Why? And then it's more than right now. We are terrible at planning in advance. As a gerontologist, I'm focused on things like life insurance and death planning, survivorship, and wills. We are just really bad at planning for those things. But if you don't, it's going to hit you and it's going to hurt if you don't do a better job of it. So that's what the 4 dimensions are. It comes from the space time, 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. But that's basically what it means. Hopefully, the little bit of time that I gave that, feel free to ask a clarifying question, but hopefully that's at least somewhat clear.
Oh, that just gives me, and hopefully not only gives me, but gives other people, the thought that to dig into that more, because now it makes sense. I mean, I recall, I don't know, maybe it was a philosophy class or something like that, that there was this conversation that if we are limited by our view of everything, so we're wide, we're tall, and we're deep, but time limits our ability to understand what's going on around us. It's that dimension of time that we kind of miss out on, and that a one-dimensional being can't see two dimensions, and a two-dimensional can't see three, and a three-dimension can't see four. So I get it.
I want to revise one thing that you just said. You said that time limits our ability to see beyond that. I would revise it to: we allow time to limit our view. We have more power to expand ourselves than we give it. So I just want to, like, we're the ones that need to be taking this action. That's one revision I want to make.
I like it. I like it. I like it. So chat a little bit with me about and it appears that again, and just some of the things that I've watched you say, and some of your writings, that you've had to do a lot of advocating inside of the healthcare system itself. And so what advice do you have, just kind of a few pointers that you can give for people? And the reason this is important in the area that, that I tend to hang out in is that, so you'll get a person will go and join an organization, join a company, or what have you. They don't get all the information that they need to stay safe in the first place. They'll get injured, and then after they get injured, they get, in some cases, they're prescribed, medication and such that causes them to develop substance use disorder. And then when they do that, they get terminated from the very company who didn't create the environment in the first place. And they find themselves having a fight with the system. Well, hold up, I'm only using this stuff because the doctor said so. But I didn't know what else I was supposed to do. And so some advice about how we should be advocating for our own health in these systems.
Yeah, it's a really common question that I get, and a lot of it comes from my own experience of, after hundreds and hundreds of encounters with various types of providers over the past few decades. I've just kind of picked up some strategies and tricks and tips and hacks to squeeze a little bit more juice. And a lot of it does come to self advocacy. I say that I'm an advocate for. The best advocates that we need to be are self advocates. And a lot of that involves better assertiveness as well. So, to bring it back down to the individual level and use an example with myself, it's very common for me to hear, like when I'm telling a story to someone, well, hey, I had this encounter with my physician. And they're like, you said that to your doctor? And I'm like, yeah, I did. I wanted to know the answer and I asked them. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've had an interaction and, they pretty much thought that what they told me, that was the end, come back next time. I'm like, hold on. I read about this thing, or I'm in this Facebook group of other people who have this, and I saw this comment, or I was thinking about this. Could it be this other thing? And because I brought that up, they were like, oh, that's a good point. Or I don't know the answer to that. Let me call one of my doctor colleagues and ask, or, oh, I didn't think about that. Let's actually change your treatment plan because you brought this thing up that has happened multiple times. And again, I do not expect any provider to know everything. But what I want is two things. One, don't act like you know everything. What physicians say, what medical providers say is not biblical truth. What anyone says is not biblical truth. Okay. And the other thing is, I love this scene in Ted Lasso. He attributes it to Walt Whitman, but Walt Whitman did not say it. I don't know who originally said it. Be curious, not judgmental. My best providers are those who are curious, are those who don't immediately jump to a conclusion, or those who are willing to call their colleagues or willing to look up recent research and don't assume that their limited understanding is going to be enough. Be curious, not judgmental. And I don't think we have enough. I don't think we have enough of that in any sector. But again, I'm focusing on healthcare. That's where I'm focused. So a lot of what I tell people is, if you have a question that you want to ask, then ask it. Be assertive enough to ask. And listen, I'm not going to sit here and say that people can just snap their fingers and say, okay, I'm going to be more assertive. Okay, I'm going to be a better self-advocate. These are skills that you have to build. Try to get a little bit better each time. Because I know I'm naturally a confrontational, assertive, blunt person. Not everyone is like that. And they're like uncomfortable, like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to say that to my doctor. You know what? Just ask one challenging question next time. And the next time you go in after that, ask two, right? Develop it over time.
You're causing me to think, and I haven't. I have a book that's due out in the spring of 2025, but I'm thinking about the second one already. And the current one is again around psychosocial hazards, trying to explain that they're real things. They really exist, and trying to get folks to address them as the issue that they are. They're not destroying everything, but you can't just skip over them either. But the point is, we say we want to live in a democracy as it relates to our government, and we allow virtually everything else to be autocratic. We go to businesses and there's one person who tells everybody what to do. We let our doctors and dentists and lawyers and whoever just basically tell us what to do. And it's as if we have no voice in it. And it applies to me. It's my life. It is something that affects me and I don't have a voice in it. And again, I just kind of reject that. I have a voice in everything that I'm involved in. If I'm involved in it, I have a voice in it. And my voice is not right or wrong. It's mine. And it's different from yours. That's all. You may have been to all of the schools and whatever. I consider myself an expert in a couple of things. And it might not be that. That doesn't mean I don't have an opinion or a feeling about it. And again, this is why we have so many toxic environments, toxic jobs, toxic healthcare exchanges, toxic families, toxic interaction with other people, because I feel a certain way. And I am told that my job is to keep my mouth closed and simply endure it. No thanks. No thanks. This doesn't work for me. This is what I believe I need. And I might not even be right, but I know I don't like this. So let's try something else. And eventually we'll stumble upon something a little bit better that'll cause me to feel better. It's not necessarily what you do, what you're doing to me or saying to me. It's how I feel about it that's registering with me.
My voice is not right or wrong. It is mine. I'm going to bar that and I'll attribute it to you, but
Oh,
that is
please,
beautiful.
please, because I think this is where a lot of these issues are, particularly when we talk about issues of diversity and inclusion, all this type of stuff. People get off on their political high horse. It Look. My voice is mine. It is not wrong. It is just different from yours. And too often we have a country, that this country wasn't built to hear my voice. It was built for land holding cisgender white men's voices to be heard. I mean, and I'm not saying they're all bad voices either. It just wasn't built for mine. So it's important that my voice, that I have to speak up because my voice wasn't included in that thing. Often who creates healthcare systems? People who are already, they think they're healthy. We don't have enough people who are actually affected by those things, involved and engaged in the systems that are supposed to address them because they're too exclusionary. You didn't go to medical school. So what? I know how this feels to me.
Yeah, I think you also said a key point of one of my other favorite things, in addition to the obesity example earlier, that when it comes to any kind of notion about healthcare policy, healthcare reform, a very common thing that I hear is, well, I don't I don't want to have any kind of socialized medicine because it's going to remove my ability to choose my own provider. And I always have two internal responses, sometimes external responses to that. First of all, I can't imagine that you have complex medical needs and you're saying that. I just can't imagine that. You must be a healthy person if you're saying that. Okay. The second thing is, like you were saying, we say that we want democracy, but we really tacitly uh, accept autocracies. And the medical industrial complex is perhaps the most autocratic industry here. The whole idea that we have the liberty to choose our own providers is an illusion that they want us to believe that we have, but we don't really have that freedom. We don't. And it is worse for people who are sick, for sure. It is worse for people who have chronic disease. But here's another thing: everyone dies from something. Okay. Most people die in older age, which means that most people die from a chronic disease. So don't sit here and tell me that you're unaffected by these issues. You're going to one day be affected by them if you're not right now. And don't sit here and tell me that you have all the freedom in the world to make these choices. You have been duped. I know I'm getting very preachy, but
That's actually yeah, that's one of the reasons why you're here. So as we start to conclude the conversation, so we've I think we both commented a bit about the system and how it is today. So as folks are, there are folks creating new things all the time, and even new approaches to medicine here in the U.S. So what would you offer to someone who's says, look, we want to do this thing differently. We want to have a system where people don't feel that they can't advocate that, we want to do this different. What are just a few things you would have them consider if they were building a healthcare delivery system from scratch? What would you have them consider?
so you're saying people want these are experts who want to buck the status quo, and they come to me to ask.
Yes. Well, I'm not even going to say they're experts. They're people who have the resources to do it and
They're
want.
not they're not patients. They're the ones who are building something. Okay, I see what you're
It's
saying.
it's whoever's. We want this to be different. We don't want to get caught up in the trap of the traditional system. And we're going to reach out to that Jacob Kendall guy because we think he's got some good things to say. What are just a few things that you would say to them?
Well, first of all, I do have some good things to say, so they should reach out. Okay. When I was a professor, most recent time, COVID hit in the middle of the spring semester, and of course, like every other institution in the country, we were scrambling to figure out the way to respond to that. And halfway through the semester, we ended up going fully online, but they provided us updates on a regular basis with vaccines, when we can come back in person, et cetera. And the one person that they had as the expert, without even questioning whether this was a good idea, was a leading infectious disease expert over in the med school at this university. And that's great. Physicians have an infectious disease physician has excellent points to offer here, excellent insights, but they're not the only people. I was in the global health department, and I knew people in the public health department, two different departments. And I know for a fact, based off what I was told, that no one in either of those departments was ever approached about their expertise in a pandemic. A pandemic is inherently a very macro, it's a public health, there's no more public health issue than a pandemic. And they didn't consult any of those. And I think that boils down to there are certain perspectives that are just valued arbitrarily as being more valuable. And in healthcare, it's that of those who go through medical school. Another one is economist. Everyone was always talking about the economic implications of the pandemic. They weren't talking about other implications of the pandemic. Here's a fact. Our government hires more economists than it does people from any other discipline. Why? Why is it that these certain professions are seen to have greater insight? I disagree with that. I think we should be hiring geographers and historians and anthropologists and sociologists and epidemiologists and theologians and faith leaders and ethicists and fill in the blank. There's not some discipline or some way of thinking that has a monopoly on truth. We have to be willing to at least temporarily set down our own lens and pick up someone else's and try, like might, it will never be perfect, but try as much as we can to see a given problem through their lens. And when that's happening among professionals, that means you got to have this kind of person and this kind of person and this kind of person sitting at the table and discussing it and fleshing it out, and do so respectfully. But that's not what we do right now. We treat certain people like they are the ones who have a monopoly on truth. Okay. That's my last time to preach.
Well, as we would say in church, amen. Jacob, thank you so much for expanding the conversation. Matter of fact, I may have to look into relabeling myself, because I think I might be more interdisciplinary than I thought I was. As you speak, I go like, wow, again, we have, as a species, really limited ourselves in areas that I'm not sure why. But why have we limited ourselves there? Well, because there's no real reason. And often it's because of the influence of those who say, well, I'm the expert and you have to take my word on it. And, again, sometimes I'll take your opinion and sometimes maybe not.
Or the ones who have enough money to assert their own opinion.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. So if folks want to get more information about your work, just the things that you're into, how would they best reach out and get in contact with you?
I think you and I connected on LinkedIn. Of all social media, that's where I'm most active. It is Jacob Evans Kendall. That's the same for my website, jacobevanskendall.com. It's Jacob EVANS Kendall KENDALL.com. And my email address is jacob@jacobevanskendall.com. Reach me via email, connect with me on LinkedIn. Let's have a conversation. And I love that. So thanks for asking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, again, thanks very much. And if you're watching or listening to this podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope something that you've heard will bring you back to an episode in the future. Previous episodes can be found at psychealthandsafetyusa.com. You can watch, like, subscribe, and share the podcast on the Flourish DX YouTube page. And please do join the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting and becoming a subscriber on LinkedIn. Until next time, stay tuned and look out for the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Tune in each week for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.